Since most of the assembly algorithms are based upon graphs, so let's look them in a short review. I will go over some introduction. I will talk about some types of the graphs. We'll talk about some graph algorithms for assembly. A graph is a set of nodes plus edges between them. Nodes and edges may also be called as vertices or arcs. So there are nodes and there are edges. Let's see what they are. So here we have those dots or points. So these points are actually your nodes, and those connections between those points, these are all edges. So a graph is a combination of nodes and edges. Directed graphs and undirected graphs, there are two main groups of the graphs. Directed graphs are where we have the directions, where we do have arrows or maybe inhibition signs you might have seen in your biology courses. In case of where you are studying those gene networks. So those directed graphs have directions. So there is an activator, there is a repressor, or there is, for example, one thing which is influencing the another. So that kind of graph is directed one. Here is an example. So we can see an arrow from C to A to B, A to D. So this is an example where we see a directed graph. Undirected graph is a set of objects called vertices or nodes that are connected together where all the edges are bidirectional. So we can say that there are no directions. So actually A can influence B and B can influence A. Sometimes we put directions on both sides, but most of the cases we see these kind of pictures. So we don't see those directions. So that's why they are called as undirected graphs. An example is later on we will talk about gene networks. So the gene co-expression networks, the networks where we see the co-expressed genes or co-expressed modules in gene expression data. So they are represented by one case or one scenario where we are using those simple Pearson correlations. Over there we'll talk about these undirected graphs. So what are different graph assembly algorithms? So assemblers have been organized into three broad categories. So mainly we use what we call it as overlap layout consensus or OLC methods. Mainly they rely on the overlaps between those short sequencing reads. So we have the overlaps, we put those overlaps as edges, and we take those reads as those nodes. The other example is de Bruijn graph, where we take those reads and we break those reads into further small fragments. We take subsets of reads and compare with them. We call them as k-mers. We'll talk about them. And the greedy approach is that may also use both of them. So it might use OLC or DBG. So basically greedy is an algorithm or an approach where we are using anything about coming from any one of the methods. So these are three main approaches for as far as the graph algorithms are concerned. Here we see these three approaches. One is where we have reads which are put together and overlaps are there. And in the overlap graph, we can take individual reads, and this read can be attached, R1 can be attached with R2, it can go with R3 also. So we can look into different possible scenarios, and all scenarios are put together, and then we can place them where we have their best alignments. So that is overlap graph. In de Bruijn, we take the reads and we then take these small parts of the reads. So here, for example, our k-mer size is equal to 3. So we can have 3 nucleotides coming from each read. A read may be 100 nucleotides, but we can divide it into almost 33 or 34 fragments where we start with nucleotide number 1, then we move into next position, nucleotide number 2, and in this way we can have chunks of 3, 3, 3 coming from those reads, and in this way from one read we can have so many these k-mers, and in the end we are actually comparing each nucleotide to each other nucleotide in that complete data set. So it's really complicated, by the way. Hamiltonian path in a graph is a path that includes each vertex of the graph once and only once, and at the end, of course, the circuit must return to the starting position. So in the graphs we explore paths. So path is if you start from one point to move to another and move to the third. So the things among that network we call them as paths. So one of them is Hamiltonian path. We can see here, for instance, in this graph we can get a path like this. So for example, from here you can go here, you can go here, here, and then you can come back. So in this way you are not revisiting each any node 2 times. but you are coming back to your from where you started. So there can be many more paths. So guys, I just traced one path. You can trace many from this diagram. Eulerian path is a path that visits every edge. So in previous we seen every node. Now we are talking about every edge. So it visits every edge once and only once, and it can end on a different vertex. And same way we can have a Eulerian circuit. So a path which begins and ends on the same vertex. So it starts and ends on the same vertex. So in that case you can have a Eulerian circuit also within this graph. So for example, here what we can do is we can go on this edge, next we can get back here, 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 and so I found one path like this. You guys can do many more. So in this way, what we are trying to implement in those nodes which are actually coming from those aligned reads, we are trying to place them, and we're trying to find these paths amongst them. So once we find those paths, there is no repetition, so we can resolve them and we can put them, these reads, together in the shape of an assembly. So in this section, what we have seen is that a graph is a set of nodes basically, plus set of edges between them, and assemblers have been organized into three categories based upon the types of graphs they are using.